This poor, starving little girl wandered aimlessly until she found a man suffering under a bridge, and she offers him a piece of bread, unaware that he's a millionaire, and what happens next will make you cry for hours. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The grey morning cloaked the historic streets of a small town in Pennsylvania with a fine, persistent drizzle. The smell of wet earth and fresh bread mingled in the air as little Iris, just 6 years old, walked barefoot along the cobblestone pavement. Her dark curls bounced with each step, and her big, expressive eyes shone with a wisdom that didn't match her young age. In her small, calloused hands, she carefully held a piece of still warm bread that Mrs. Higgins, the kind baker from the neighborhood, had given her. Iris's stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten anything since the night before, when she shared the last handful of grits they had at home with her grandma, June. Even so, her steps were firm, and a sweet smile played on her lips. She had learned early that hunger was a constant companion, but she didn't let it extinguish the light in her eyes. As she passed under the old stone bridge that connected the two parts of the neighborhood, Iris spotted a figure leaning against one of the pillars. It was a man with a disheveled appearance, unshaven and wearing dirty clothes, who seemed lost in deep thought. His eyes, however, had a different glint than the other homeless people the girl usually saw. Without hesitating, Iris approached the man. "Mister," she called out in her childish voice, "I'm hungry too, but I'll give you this. Bread." The man looked up, surprised by the unexpected offer. For a moment he was silent, studying the girl's face. There was something in her gaze that deeply disconcerted him. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice revealing an education that contrasted with his appearance. "Iris," she replied, still holding out the bread. "And yours?" "You can call me Joe," he replied after a brief hesitation. What Iris didn't know was that this man wasn't just a homeless person. Theodore Ted Albright, 45, was actually one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the state. 3 months ago, after receiving a diagnosis he believed to be terminal, he decided to abandon his life of luxury to understand the true meaning of existence before he passed away. "I can't accept your bread, little girl," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. "You need it more than I do." Iris frowned, determined. "Grandma June always says we share what we have, even if it's just a little. You look like you need more than food." Those words hit Ted like a punch to the stomach. How could such a small child see so deeply into his soul? Reluctantly, he accepted half of the bread that Iris insisted on breaking in half. "Where do you live?" he asked, worried about this girl who was walking alone on the streets. "Over there," she pointed to the hill that rose beyond the bridge. "With my grandma June. She makes crafts with corn husks, pretty things, just like her." Ted observed the indicated direction, noting the simple houses that perched on the hillside. His heart, hardened by years of cold negotiations and calculated decisions, felt a different kind of ache. "And your parents?" he asked, fearing the answer. Iris's smile faltered for a moment. "They left a long time ago. But Grandma says that sometimes people need to go far away to find their way back." At that moment, something changed inside Ted. The girl finished eating her piece of bread and said goodbye with a wave, her bare feet leaving small marks on the damp earth. Without her realizing it, he discreetly followed her, watching her climb the hill to a small, unfinished brick house. On the porch, a gray-haired woman with a face marked by time braided corn husks with nimble fingers. June, 67, looked up when her granddaughter approached, and her smile lit up her whole face. "Grandma, I met a new friend today," said Iris, sitting next to her grandmother. "He was sad, so I gave him half of my bread." June ran her hand through her granddaughter's hair. "You have too big of a heart for someone so small, my flower." Hidden behind a tree, Ted felt something strange in his chest. In all his years running one of the largest companies in the state, he had never experienced a gesture of kindness as pure as that child's. That night, alone in the small boarding house room where he was hiding, Ted couldn't get Iris and her grandmother out of his head. He thought about his own life, the choices he had made, the relationships he had sacrificed in the name of success. His brother, Junior, whom he hadn't seen in years. His ex-wife, Ursula, who now controlled the finances of his company, all the ties he had cut in his relentless pursuit of power and wealth. As he looked out the window, observing the lights of the historic town, he made a decision. Maybe he didn't have much time to live, according to what he believed, but he would use that time to do something meaningful. That girl had given him more than half a loaf of bread. She had given him a lesson about the true value of generosity. What Ted didn't imagine was that his decision to help Iris and June would trigger a series of events that would change not only their lives, but also his own, in ways he could never have foreseen. The small family he found under the stone bridge held secrets and stories that would intertwine with his destiny, in a plot that was just beginning to unfold in the old streets of the Pennsylvania town. The next morning, June woke up before sunrise, as she did every day. Her hands, calloused from working with corn husks, were already beginning to protest, but she couldn't afford to rest. The little money she earned from her crafts was barely enough to buy food, and the water and electricity bills were 2 months overdue. As she prepared a weak coffee, the only luxury she allowed herself in the morning, she watched Iris sleeping on the thin mattress spread out on the floor of the small living room. Her heart ached to see her granddaughter living in such a precarious situation, but June held on to faith and work to keep discouragement from taking over. "Good morning, Grandma," Iris murmured, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Are you going to work already?" "Yes, my flower. I need to finish those baskets they ordered. Do you want to help me today?" The girl's eyes lit up. She loved watching her grandmother transform the husks into beautiful objects, her hands dancing between the golden strands with a skill that seemed magical. But before she could answer, a knock on the door caught their attention. It was Mrs. Higgins, the baker, with a worried expression on her face. "June, I came running to warn you. The social worker is making visits in the neighborhood. Apparently, there was a complaint about a child who isn't going to school." June's blood ran cold. For months, she had been trying to enroll Iris in the public school, but she always ran into bureaucracy and a lack of openings. Besides, she didn't have the money to buy a uniform and school supplies. "My God, Higgins, what do I do? If they find out Iris isn't studying..." "Calm down, woman. I'll help you. I brought some day-old bread and an old primer that belonged to my granddaughter. At least the girl can start learning at home." While the women talked, Ted watched the activity from afar. He had spent the night planning how to help that family without revealing his identity. In his pocket, an envelope with enough money to pay the overdue bills burned like embers. Determined, he approached the house when Mrs. Higgins had already left. His heart beat fast. It was the first time in 3 months that he had gotten so close to other people since he began his journey as a bum. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "Could I get a glass of water?" Iris, who was playing in the yard, recognized him immediately. "Grandma, it's Mr. Joe, the friend I told you about yesterday." June appeared at the door, drying her hands on her apron. Her eyes studied the man with a mixture of caution and compassion. There was something different about him, something that didn't match his worn clothes. "Come in, Joe. Would you like a little coffee?" Ted felt a lump in his throat. The house was small and simple, but impeccably clean. On the walls, old portraits in makeshift picture frames told silent stories of better times. "You make beautiful things," he commented, observing the crafts scattered around the room. "It's what I know how to do." June replied simply. I learned it from my mother, who learned it from her mother. Family tradition. As they talked, Ted noticed the primer that Iris was leafing through with curiosity. Do you like to study, little one? Yes, Mr. Joe, but I still don't know how to read well. I really want to go to school. It was at that moment that June began to cough, a strong fit that made her lean against the wall. Ted realized how pale she was and how difficult her breathing seemed. You need to take care of yourself, he said, genuinely concerned. It's nothing, she replied, trying to disguise it. Just an old cold that doesn't want to go away. But Ted knew it was more than that. In his years as an entrepreneur, he had developed a keen eye for assessing situations, and he could see that June's health was seriously compromised. Before leaving, he discreetly left the envelope with money dropped near the door. His plan was simple. He would help that family little by little so that they wouldn't suspect his true identity. What he didn't expect was to find Davis, the social worker, coming down the hill as he walked away. The woman, approximately 35 years old, carried a folder full of documents and a serious expression on her face. Sir, do you know the family that lives in that house? She asked, pointing to June's residence. Ted felt his heart race. I just asked for water, he replied, trying to maintain the role of a homeless person. They are good people. Davis made some notes on her clipboard. We received a complaint about the child. Apparently, she doesn't attend school and is always alone on the streets. At that moment, Ted realized that his mission would be more complicated than he imagined. It wouldn't be enough just to help financially. He would need to find a way to protect Iris and June from the system that, although well-intentioned, could separate that family. Back in his room at the boarding house, he picked up the cell phone he kept hidden and made a call. Mike, I need a favor. I want you to buy a house on Beacon Hill in Pennsylvania. Use a shell company. I don't want anyone to know I'm the buyer. Meanwhile, in her luxurious office in Pittsburgh, Ursula, Ted's ex-wife, was leading another board meeting. In the 3 months since her ex-husband's disappearance, she had managed to implement significant changes in the company. Not all of them ethical. Profits increased 30% in the last quarter, she announced with a cold smile. And that's just the beginning. What no one in the room realized was that behind those impressive numbers was a series of questionable financial maneuvers. Ursula was determined to prove that she could be more successful than Ted, even if she had to cross some lines to do it. Back in the small town, June found the envelope with money when she was sweeping the house. Her hands trembled as she counted the bills. It was more money than she had seen in months. It must be a gift from God, she murmured, tears in her eyes. Iris, who was playing with scraps of husk on the floor, looked up. Do you think Mr. Joe left it, Grandma? June looked out the window thoughtfully. There was something familiar about that man, something she couldn't explain. But how could a homeless person have so much money? What she didn't know was that this was just the first step in a series of events that would transform her life and her granddaughters. Ted, hidden in his new identity, was beginning to weave a web of protection around that family, without imagining that his own heart, which had been closed to the world for so long, was also about to be transformed. The news of the money found by June spread quickly through the neighborhood, provoking different reactions among the neighbors. Some celebrated the family's luck, while others, driven by envy, began to spread malicious rumors. Mrs. Higgins, the baker, tried to defend her friend. June is a good woman, hard-working. If she received this blessing, it's because she deserves it. But not everyone thought that way. Wilma, a neighbor known for her sharp tongue, didn't miss the opportunity to raise suspicions. Money like that, appearing out of nowhere? Something's wrong there. And this Joe guy, who nobody knows very well. The gossip reached the ears of Davis, the social worker, who now watched June's house with even more attention. On her last visit, she had noticed worrying details. the lack of a proper bed for Iris, the lack of food in the pantry, and now this mysterious money. Meanwhile, Ted continued his careful approach to the family. After leaving the envelope with money, he began to appear more frequently, always maintaining his persona of Mr. Joe. On one of those visits, he found Iris alone in the yard, trying to decipher the letters in the old primer. "Do you want help?" he offered, sitting next to the girl. "Do you know how to read?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. "Yes, I learned a long time ago." For 2 hours, Ted patiently taught the girl the first letters. His natural teaching skills surprised him. He had never imagined he would have a talent for teaching. Iris, in turn, proved to be an extraordinarily intelligent student, absorbing each new piece of information with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. "Mr. Joe," she said suddenly, "why do you talk differently from the other homeless people?" The question caught Ted off guard. He was so absorbed in the role of teacher that he had let his guard down, letting his formal education show through. Before he could elaborate an answer, June appeared at the door, paler than normal. "Iris, my flower, go get some water for Grandma." When the girl went inside, June faced Ted with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "You're not a common homeless man, are you?" Ted felt his heart race. "Why do you say that, Mrs. June? I've lived long enough to recognize when someone is pretending to be what they're not, but I also know how to recognize a kindness when I see it." Before the conversation could continue, a violent coughing fit struck June. This time it was so strong that it made her stagger. Ted quickly steadied her, feeling how weak she was. "You need a doctor," he insisted, genuinely concerned. "I can't afford it," she replied, catching her breath, "and the free clinic only has openings in 3 months. That night, alone in his room at the boarding house, Ted couldn't sleep. The image of June being sick wouldn't leave his head. He picked up his cell phone and made another call to Mike, his trusted assistant. "I need you to set up an appointment with Dr. Robert, that cardiologist, but not at his office. I want him to make a house call, like he's with the Public Health Service." The next day, while June was working on her crafts, she received an unexpected visit. Dr. Robert, a distinguished gentleman with gray hair, introduced himself as a volunteer doctor with the Family Health Program. The diagnosis was worrying. June suffered from a serious heart condition that required immediate treatment. "You need medication and specific tests," the doctor explained, discreetly leaving the prescriptions and test requests on the table. What June didn't know was that all the costs were already covered by Ted through a complex network of intermediaries. The entrepreneur had set up a meticulous scheme to make all the help seem like it was coming from legitimate social programs. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, Ursula began to suspect strange financial movements in Ted's personal accounts. As the company's CFO, she still had access to some of her ex-husband's banking information. "Regular transfers to the small town in Pennsylvania?" she murmured, analyzing the statements. "What are you up to, Ted?" Determined to find out what was happening, Ursula hired a private investigator. "I want to know exactly where this money is going," she ordered, "and above all, I want to know if Ted is alive." Back in the small town, Iris's life was beginning to subtly change. With daily lessons from Mr. Joe, she could already identify all the letters of the alphabet and form some simple words. More than that, she had developed a special connection with that mysterious man who seemed to know so much about everything. "Grandma," she said one night, while helping June organize the husks for the next day's work, "Mr. Joe is different, isn't he? He knows a lot of stuff." June smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes, my flower, people are like your corn husk braids. They seem simple on the outside, but when you look closely, you see that they have many layers, many hidden stories." The wisdom of that observation was greater than June could imagine. At that very moment, Ted was facing an increasingly intense internal battle. The diagnosis that had led him to abandon everything was beginning to seem doubtful. The symptoms that should have been worsening seemed, in fact, to be diminishing. More than that, for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The mornings teaching Iris, the conversations with June, even the greetings from the neighbors who already considered him part of the community. All of this had a taste of authenticity that he had never found in his life as a successful businessman. But dark clouds were approaching. Davis, the social worker, had scheduled an official visit for the following week, and this time she would be accompanied by a team from Child Protective Services. Rumors about the mysterious money and the constant presence of a bum in the house had reached the authorities. The net was beginning to close, and Ted knew he would need to make difficult decisions. Maintaining his disguise could put Iris's custody at risk, but revealing his true identity would mean facing consequences that could be even worse. On a particularly tense afternoon, while watching Iris playing in the yard, June surprised Ted with a direct question. "Why did you choose to help us?" The question caught Ted off guard. How to explain that he was the one who had been helped? That a child's simple gesture of offering her bread had awakened something in him that he thought was lost forever? "Sometimes," he replied after a long silence, "we think we're giving when we're actually receiving." June nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "You know, Joe, I have a strange gift. I can see the truth in people's eyes, and in your eyes I see a good man who is lost looking for his way back home." Those words hit Ted like a lightning bolt. Home. How long had it been since he knew what it was really like to have a home? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp scream coming from the yard. Iris had fallen while playing, and a deep cut on her knee was beginning to bleed. Ted's instinctive reaction was to grab his cell phone to call an ambulance, but he managed to contain himself in time. A homeless person wouldn't have a latest model smartphone in his pocket. While June took care of her granddaughter's injury with the few resources she had, Ted realized that his charade was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, the investigator hired by Ursula had just arrived in the small town, following the trail of money that would lead him to that small house on the hill. The day dawned with a fine, persistent rain in the Pennsylvania small town, the kind of drizzle that penetrates to the bones. In the small back room that June had given to Joe, Ted woke up startled. He had dreamed of his old life. The endless meetings, the business dinners, the failed marriage with Ursula. Everything seemed so distant now, as if it belonged to another person. June's cough, coming from the main house, brought him back to reality. Even with the medications that Dr. Robert had prescribed, the woman's health was not showing significant improvement. Ted knew she needed more specific tests, but getting them without raising suspicions was becoming increasingly difficult. "Mr. Joe," Iris's voice called him from the yard, "you promised to teach me more words today." Smiling, Ted picked up the primer he had secretly bought, much newer and more colorful than the old one, and went out to meet his little student. In just a few weeks, Iris's progress was remarkable. She could already read simple words and was beginning to form complete sentences. "Look what I learned all by myself," she exclaimed, showing him a paper where she had written in shaky handwriting, "I love my grandma." Ted's heart ached. How could a child who barely had anything to eat have so much love to give? But before he could respond, an unusual movement on the street caught his attention. A black car, clearly not belonging to the neighborhood, was slowly passing by for the third time that morning. What Ted didn't know was that inside the vehicle was Randy Davis, the investigator hired by Ursula. Experienced in his work, Randy had already mapped out the entire routine of the house in the last 3 days. There was something about the figure of the supposed homeless person that didn't fit. "Mrs. Ursula," he said on the phone when he was at a safe distance. I think I found something interesting. Your ex-husband is definitely involved with a family here in the small town, an elderly woman and a child. On the other end of the line, Ursula smiled with satisfaction. She finally had something concrete to use against Ted. "Keep watching," she ordered. "I want to know every detail of this story." Meanwhile, at June's house, the morning continued its normal course. Ted was helping Iris with her lessons when Davis, the social worker, appeared for another surprise visit. This time she was accompanied by Karen, a child protective services officer with a stern expression. "Mrs. June," Davis began in a professional voice, "we have received new complaints about Iris's situation. Neighbors are concerned about the constant presence of an unknown person in the house." June, who was sitting in her straw chair, straightened. Her posture, even sick, she maintained an impressive dignity. "Mr. Joe is a good person," she defended. "He's helping my granddaughter learn to read." Karen frowned, making notes on her clipboard. "And do you have his documents? Do you know anything about his past?" The silence that followed was heavy. Ted, who was watching the scene from the yard, felt his stomach churn. He was putting at risk the only family that had truly welcomed him. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Karen said, addressing Ted coldly. "It's not appropriate for a stranger to have so much contact with a child." "No," cried Iris, running to hug Ted. "Mr. Joe is my friend. He teaches me. He helps Grandma." The scene broke everyone's heart. Even Karen, accustomed to difficult situations, seemed momentarily shaken. "Mr. Joe," Davis intervened, more diplomatically, "I understand that your intentions may be good, but we need to think about the child's well-being. You understand, don't you?" Ted understood all too well. He knew that his presence, without a plausible explanation, was becoming a problem. But how to reveal his true identity without destroying the trust that Iris and June had placed in him? It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. June, who had been following the conversation in silence, stood up suddenly. Her face turned pale, and before anyone could react, she staggered and fell. "Grandma!" Iris's desperate cry echoed through the house. Ted acted on instinct, completely forgetting his role as a homeless person. He picked up his cell phone and called Dr. Robert, using his businessman's tone accustomed to giving orders. "I need a private ambulance immediately. It's a cardiac emergency." Davis and Karen watched the scene, stunned. That wasn't the behavior of a homeless person. The way he spoke, the way he moved, everything indicated someone accustomed to being in command. "Who are you, really?" asked Davis while they waited for the ambulance. But Ted couldn't answer. All his attention was focused on June, who was breathing with difficulty, and on Iris, who was crying, clinging to her grandmother's hand. The ambulance arrived in record time, one of the best in Pittsburgh, equipped with the most modern medical technology. The paramedics, clearly prepared by Dr. Robert, treated June with professional efficiency. "I'm going with her," declared Ted when they began to put June in the ambulance. "You can't," intervened one of the paramedics, but he fell silent when he recognized something in Ted's gaze. "I'm going too," insisted Iris, but this time it was Davis who interfered. "No, honey. First, we need to resolve your situation. You will be under the temporary custody of Child Protective Services until your grandmother recovers." It was as if lightning had struck Ted. His entire plan to help discreetly was collapsing. The girl who had taught him the true meaning of generosity was about to be separated from the only family she knew. "You can't do that," he said, his voice changing completely. "This girl isn't going anywhere." Everyone present turned to him, surprised by the sudden change in posture. It was no longer the humble Mr. Joe who spoke, but Theodore Albright, the businessman accustomed to being obeyed. "And who are you to decide that?" challenged Karen. It was at that moment that a new car arrived on the street. From it descended an elegant woman, approximately 50 years old, her high heels tapping with determination on the cobblestone pavement. "He's Theodore Albright," said Ursula, a triumphant smile on her lips. "My ex-husband, who apparently decided to play bum while abandoning his responsibilities at the company." The shock was general. Iris looked from Ted to Ursula, her big eyes full of confusion and hurt. Tears streamed silently down her face as the reality of the betrayal washed over her. "You lied," whispered the girl, taking a step back. "All this time you lied to us." Ted felt as if his heart was being torn from his chest. Everything he had built in recent months, all the trust, all the affection, was collapsing before his eyes. The ambulance left carrying June, its siren echoing through the narrow streets of the small town. Karen made a gesture to take Iris, but Ted intervened. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have a proposal to make." The silence that followed Ted's statement was broken only by the distant sound of the ambulance carrying June. The fine rain had given way to a weak sun, which illuminated the surreal scene that unfolded on that narrow street of the Pennsylvania small town. A millionaire businessman dressed as a bum, his elegant ex-wife with an ironic smile on her lips, two social service representatives clearly confused, and a little girl whose world had just been turned upside down. "What kind of proposal?" asked Davis, maintaining professionalism despite the unusual situation. Ted took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. His entire original plan had collapsed, but perhaps there was still a chance to fix things. "I am legally responsible and financially capable of taking care of Iris while June is hospitalized," he began, his tone returning to that of the competent businessman he had always been. "I can provide all the necessary documents in a matter of hours." Ursula let out a dry laugh. "You? The man who abandoned his own company to play bum? What kind of responsible would you be?" "Actually," Karen interjected, consulting her notes, "you have been a constant and positive presence in the child's life. We have records that you are teaching her to read, and from previous reports, your influence has been beneficial." Iris, who had been silent until then, took a step forward. Her eyes, normally so sweet, were hard as stones. "Why did you lie to us? Grandma trusted you. I trusted you." The girl's words hit Ted like a punch to the stomach. How to explain to a 6-year-old the complexities that led him to that situation? "Iris," he began, kneeling to be at her height, "sometimes people get lost along the way. I was lost when you found me under that bridge. I was sick, or I thought I was, and I wanted to understand what really mattered in life before you left," finished the girl, surprising everyone with her perception. "Like my parents leaving." Ursula, who was watching the scene with growing irritation, decided to intervene. "This is all very touching, but we have practical matters to resolve. Ted, the company's a mess since you disappeared. The shareholders are furious. There are important decisions pending. The company can wait." Ted cut her off, without taking his eyes off Iris. "Some things are more important than money and power. You taught me that, little one, when you shared your bread with me." It was at that moment that a police car pulled up on the street. From it descended a tall man, approximately 45 years old, who shared familiar features with Ted. "Junior," Ted murmured, surprised to see his brother. "Mike called me," Junior explained, approaching the group. "Said you were in trouble again, little bro. But I confess I wasn't expecting this," he completed, gesturing to his brother's worn clothes. Junior's arrival added a new layer of complexity to the situation. The brothers hadn't spoken in years, since a fight over business matters that had divided the family. "Who is he?" Iris asked Davis, her small voice revealing how overwhelmed she was with so many revelations. "I'm his uncle," Junior replied, pointing to Ted. And I'm a detective here in the small town. I've been looking for my brother for months, since he disappeared without a trace. Karen cleared her throat, calling everyone's attention. We need to resolve the child's situation now. The law is clear. Without a legal guardian present, Iris needs to be in state custody until her grandmother recovers. No! Exclaimed Ted and Iris simultaneously. It was Junior who presented a solution. As a local authority and a direct relative of Ted, I can temporarily assume responsibility for the girl, provided that she remains in the small town and can visit her grandmother regularly in the hospital. Davis and Karen exchanged glances, considering the proposal. It was a solution that met the legal requirements and kept Iris in a family environment. There's just one problem, said Ursula, her tone venomous. Ted can't simply abandon his responsibilities again. The shareholders are meeting tomorrow to vote for his permanent removal from the presidency. And who said, I want to continue as president? Ted countered, surprising everyone. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What I don't have is a real family. At that moment, as if by a divine sign, Davis's phone rang. It was from the hospital. Mrs. June is stable, she informed after hanging up, but she will need surgery and a long recovery period. Iris, who had remained strong until then, finally burst into tears. Ted made a move to hug her, but the girl pulled away, taking refuge with Junior. I don't want your lies anymore, she sobbed. I want my grandma. The impact of those words was devastating for Ted. All the good he had tried to do, all his good intentions, had turned into hurt and distrust. Maybe, said Junior gently, we all need some time to process all this. Iris can stay with me for a few days, while Ted resolves his pending issues in Pittsburgh and June recovers. The suggestion seemed sensible, but there was one detail that no one had considered. What would happen to June's house during her absence? As if reading their thoughts, Mrs. Higgins, who was watching everything from her bakery, approached. I can take care of the house and the crafts, she offered. People are still ordering June's pieces. It would be a shame to leave everything stopped. While the adults settled the practical details of the situation, Iris remained silent, her small, well transformed in a matter of hours. All her certainties had been shaken. Her friend Joe was actually a rich man who had lied. Her grandmother was in the hospital, and she would have to live with a stranger who claimed to be the uncle of the man who had deceived her. Can I at least get my things? She asked, her voice small but determined. Davis accompanied the girl to the room, where Iris gathered her few clothes and, more importantly, the primer with which she was learning to read. Even hurt, she couldn't get rid of that gift that represented her first step towards knowledge. Ted watched everything with a broken heart. He had started that journey seeking to understand the value of life, and now he realized that the most valuable lesson, the importance of truth and trust, had come from a 6-year-old child. I'm going to fix everything, he promised, more to himself than to others, no matter how long it takes. As the sun set in the small town, a car left carrying Iris and Junior, another took Ursula back to Pittsburgh, and Ted remained there, alone. On the street, still dressed as Mr. Joe, but carrying the weight of who he really was. What no one knew was that that day marked only the beginning of an even greater transformation, not only in Ted's life, but in the lives of all those involved in that extraordinary story that began with a simple gesture of kindness under a stone bridge. The first rays of sun found Ted still awake in his room at the boarding house, now dressed in clothes appropriate to his true social condition. He had spent the whole night going over the events of the previous day, torturing himself with the expression of disappointment on Iris's face. In the hospital, June remained stable, but the doctors insisted on the need for complex and expensive surgery. You need to rest, said Mary Carmen, the boarding house owner, bringing a cup of strong coffee. She had been the only one to know his true identity from the beginning, keeping his secret in exchange for the promise that he wasn't there to harm anyone. How can I rest, Mary? I destroyed the trust of the two people who matter most to me now. The woman sat down on the simple chair in the room, her wise eyes studying the man in front of her. You know, Ted, sometimes we need to break something to be able to fix it right. Like those bones that don't heal well and need to be broken again. Meanwhile, at Junior's house, Iris faced her first morning away from everything she knew. The detective lived in a comfortable but simple house in the historic center of the small town, with his wife Connie, a teacher in the public school system. "Do you like cornbread, honey?" asked Connie, trying to break the silence during breakfast. Iris only nodded, her eyes fixed on the plate. She hadn't touched the food, despite the delicious smell that filled the kitchen. "You know," Connie continued, sitting next to the girl, "when I met your Uncle Junior, he was also very hurt by his brother. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the most, even unintentionally." The girl finally raised her eyes. Why did they fight? Junior, who entered the kitchen at that moment, hesitated before answering. "For nonsense, actually. I wanted to use the company's money for social projects. Your Uncle Ted thought we needed to focus on profits. We ended up saying things we shouldn't, and pride didn't let us go back. Like my parents," Iris murmured. "They also fought and left." The couple exchanged worried glances. They knew the story through social reports. Iris's parents had abandoned the girl with her grandmother after a violent fight, disappearing without a trace. In Pittsburgh, Ted faced a different battle. The meeting with the shareholders had been called for that morning, and Ursula seemed determined to remove him from the presidency. "The numbers don't lie," she presented, projecting graphs on the screen of the meeting room. "Since Ted abandoned his responsibilities, I have implemented changes that have increased our profit by 40%, at the cost of mass layoffs and cutting employee benefits," countered Ted, who had arrived in the middle of the presentation. He wore an impeccable suit, but his posture was different, more human, less corporate. The room went silent. No one expected his presence, much less his following words. "Gentlemen, I have not come to fight for my position. I have come to propose a complete restructuring of the company." For 2 hours, Ted presented a plan that left everyone speechless. He proposed dividing the company into two. The traditional part, focused on profits, would stay with Ursula and the shareholders, who supported her. The other half would become a foundation focused on education and social development projects. "You've gone crazy," exploded Ursula. "Are you going to throw away years of work because of a child and a sick old woman?" "No," Ted replied calmly. "I'm finally going to use my money and influence to make the difference my brother always wanted to make." While the meeting continued tense in Pittsburgh, in the small town, Mrs. Higgins made a surprising discovery while organizing June's crafts. Hidden among the corn husks, she found a yellowed envelope addressed to Iris. "Davis," she called the social worker who was inspecting the house. "I think we need to show this to the girl." In the hospital, June woke up slowly from sedation. Dr. Robert explained her condition. She would need complex heart surgery, but there was a good chance of full recovery. "I can't afford it," she murmured weakly. "Everything is already taken care of," assured the doctor. "The important thing now is for you to get well, to go back to your granddaughter." What no one expected was the visit that arrived that afternoon at the hospital. Connie had decided to take Iris to see her grandmother, even against Junior's initial recommendations. "Grandma!" The girl's emotional cry echoed through the room. June, even debilitated, broke into a radiant smile. "My flower, are you okay? Are they taking good care of you?" "Yes, Grandma. Aunt Connie makes cornbread just like yours, and Uncle Junior let me sleep with the light on because I was scared." While grandmother and granddaughter talked, Connie noticed something different in June's face. a concern that went beyond her physical condition. "Mrs. June," she began delicately, "is there something you want to tell us?" The elderly woman hesitated, looking at her granddaughter with watery eyes. "There is, but first I need to talk to Ted, or Joe, as we know him." As if he had been summoned, Ted appeared at the door of the room at that very moment. He had flown straight from Pittsburgh after the meeting, unable to stay away any longer. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, making a move to back away at the sight of Iris. "Stay," asked June, her voice weak but firm. "There's something you all need to know." Iris, who had initially recoiled at Ted's arrival, noticed something different in her old friend. It wasn't just the expensive clothes that replaced Mr. Joe's rags. It was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that she had never noticed before. "Before you tell us," interrupted Mrs. Higgins, entering the room hastily, "I found this at your house, June. I think it's part of the story you want to tell." The yellowed envelope passed from hand to hand until it reached Iris. With trembling fingers, the girl opened it, revealing a letter written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. "It's from your parents," explained June softly. "It arrived 2 months ago, but I didn't have the courage to show it before. And now, with everything that has happened, I think it's time for all the truths to come to light." The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. In that hospital room, lives that had been intertwined by chance were about to discover that perhaps nothing was really coincidence. The letter in her small hands held secrets that would forever change the story of everyone present. But mainly, it would help Iris understand that sometimes people lie not out of malice, but out of fear of hurting those they love. The hospital room plunged into a deep silence as Iris held the letter, her small hands trembling slightly. Connie, sensing the girl's anguish, offered gently, "Would you like me to read it to you, dear?" Iris nodded, handing over the envelope, carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. Connie cleared her throat softly and began to read. "Dear Iris, I know you must be very angry with us, and you have every right to be. We left your life in a way that no mother and father should leave. But today I am writing to try to explain, not to ask for forgiveness, because I know that some things are difficult to forgive. When we left, it wasn't because we didn't love you. It was because we were broken inside, destroyed by problems we didn't know how to solve. Your father was struggling with severe depression, and I didn't know how to help him. Our fights became frequent, and we feared that our darkness would end up hurting you. Your grandmother June, wiser than us, realized what was happening. It was she who suggested that we move away until we could heal ourselves. Sometimes you need to get lost to find yourself," she said. At this point, Iris interrupted the reading, looking at her grandmother with wide eyes. "That's why you always say that, Grandma." June, with tears in her eyes, nodded. "Continue reading, Connie, please." "In those years away, we sought help. Your father finally accepted treatment, and I learned to be stronger, more patient. It wasn't easy, and every day away from you hurt like an open wound. But we needed to heal first, so we could be the parents you deserve. Now we are coming back. Not to take you away from June, who has been more of a mother to you than I ever was, but to try, if you allow it, to be part of your life again. We are living in a town some hours from the small town. Your father got a job as a music teacher, and I am teaching crafts. I learned that this talent comes from family. The decision to approach us again is yours, my little one. June has kept us informed about you all this time, sending photos and telling us about your development. We know of your generous heart, of how you help your grandmother with the crafts, of how loved you are by everyone in the neighborhood." Ted, who was listening to everything in silence, felt his heart clench. He was beginning to understand why. June had been so receptive to him, why she could see beyond his lie. She knew well the weight of secrets kept out of love. The letter continued. Recently your grandmother told us about a man named Joe, who appeared in your lives like a guardian angel. She said that you found under a bridge and shared her bread with him, even though she was hungry. That gesture filled us with pride and also with shame. Pride for the wonderful person you have become, and shame for not having been there to see that growth. Iris looked at Ted, who kept his head down, visibly moved. The girl felt something change inside her little heart. She was beginning to understand that sometimes people kept secrets not out of malice, but out of fear or out of love. We want to meet this Joe, the letter continued. Thank him for taking care of you when we couldn't. June says there's something special about him, something that goes beyond appearances. She has always had a gift for seeing the truth in people. We will be in the small town next month if you want to see us. The decision is yours. My daughter, we have learned the hard way that true love means respecting the other person's time and feelings. With all our love, even if you can't believe it yet, Mom and Dad. When Connie finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Junior, accustomed to the harshness of his work as a detective, disguised his emotion by cleaning his glasses. "Why didn't you show it to me before?" asked Iris to her grandmother, her voice small but without accusation. "Because you were already going through so many changes, my flower, and because—" June hesitated, looking at Ted, "because I saw in Joe the same search for redemption that I saw in your parents, people who got lost trying to find their way back." It was then that Mrs. Higgins, who had remained quiet until that moment, decided to reveal one more discovery. "There's one more thing. I found this along with the letter." She took out from her apron pocket an old photograph, yellowed by time. In the image, a group of children posed in front of a church. Among them, two boys stood out, one holding a piece of bread, offering after the other, who seemed sad and lonely. "It's you," said June, looking at Ted and Junior. "Back when your parents were also going through difficulties and you lived here in the small town." The brothers took the photo in amazement. The memory of that day was buried so deep that they had completely forgotten. "It was you," murmured Junior, looking at his brother. "You shared your bread with me when our family was starving." "How could I forget that?" Ted couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the irony of fate. He had received from Iris the same gesture of kindness that he once offered his brother, a cycle of generosity that spanned generations. "I think I understand now," said Iris softly, surprising everyone with her maturity. "You didn't lie because you wanted to deceive. You lied because you were lost, just like my parents were." At that moment, something changed in the room. It was as if all the hurts and resentments began to dissolve, giving way to a deeper understanding about the nature of forgiveness and love. June, observing the scene with tired but happy eyes, knew that there was one more truth to be revealed, a truth that connected all those lives in an even more surprising way. But her weak heart asked for a moment of pause. Some revelations needed to wait for the right moment to come to light. "I think we've had enough emotions for today," said Dr. Robert, entering the room to check on his patient. "Mrs. June needs to rest." Before everyone left, Iris approached Ted. "Mr. Joe, I mean Mr. Theodore, are you still going to teach me to read?" The businessman felt tears in his eyes. "If you still want to learn with me, little one, I will teach you everything I know. And this time," she completed with a small smile, "no lies, no lies," he promised. "Only truths from now on." What no one knew was that the greatest truth of all was still to come, a truth kept in June's heart for decades, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The days that followed brought a new routine for everyone. Iris continued to live with Junior and Connie, but now spent afternoons at the hospital with her grandmother, always accompanied by Ted, who had rented a house near the historic center of the small town. Reading lessons resumed, this time in a more appropriate environment, the hospital library, where other patients and children often stopped to listen to the stories the two shared. On that specific afternoon, while June rested after another series of exams, Ted watched Iris trying to read an entire page by herself. Her progress was remarkable. In a few weeks, she could already form complete sentences. "Look, I did it!" she exclaimed proudly after finishing the paragraph. "Uncle Ted, why did you decide to teach me to read?" The question caught the businessman by surprise. It was the first time Iris had called him uncle, and there was a genuine curiosity in her eyes that deserved an equally honest answer. "Because when I was a child," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I also had difficulty studying. My parents worked a lot and we didn't always have money for school supplies. It was a teacher, Mrs. Antonia, who noticed my interest in books and started teaching me after class. She changed my life. And where is she now?" "She passed away many years ago," Ted replied softly. "But before, she made me promise that one day I would pass on what she taught me. I think I was waiting to find the right student." The moment was interrupted by Davis, who entered the library carrying a folder full of documents. Her normally serious face wore an expression difficult to decipher. "Mr. Theodore, can we talk in private?" Connie, who had arrived to pick up Iris, noticed the tension in the air and took the girl to see her grandmother. As soon as they were alone, Davis opened the folder on the table. "We found something in the city's old records," she began, "something that may explain why June has always seemed so connected to your story." Before she could continue, they were interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Ursula had arrived at the hospital, accompanied by two lawyers and wearing a triumphant expression on her face. "Ted," she called, her voice echoing through the silent hallway, "we need to talk. I discovered something very interesting about your new family." The businessman felt his blood run cold. He knew that tone. It was the same Ursula used when she was about to destroy a competitor in business. "Not here, Ursula," he tried to argue, but she was already taking documents out of her folder. "Why not? Everyone needs to know that this whole story is nothing more than a farce. Your dear June is not who she claims to be." "What are you talking about?" intervened Davis, her professional posture masking her concern. "I'm talking about the fact that this woman," Ursula pointed towards June's room, "is not Iris's real grandmother. The girl's original birth records show another name." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. Connie was running down the hallway, pale as a sheet. "June is having another crisis," she announced, causing everyone to momentarily forget Ursula's revelation. The medical team acted quickly, but this time the situation seemed more serious. Dr. Robert, after stabilizing the patient, called Ted for a private conversation. "We can no longer postpone the surgery," explained the doctor. "Her heart is getting weaker and weaker. We need to operate tomorrow." "Do whatever is necessary," Ted replied, signing the authorization documents that the doctor handed him. "Money is not a problem." "It's not just a matter of money," intervened Ursula, who had followed the two. "You have no legal authority to authorize anything. You are not her relative." "But I am," said a firm voice coming from the door. Everyone turned to see Junior, still in his detective uniform, holding an old folder of documents. His face showed signs of someone who had cried recently. "What are you talking about, Junior?" asked Ted, confused. "About the documents that Davis found," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "And about the ones I just discovered in the police department archives. Ted, June is our aunt." The revelation hit everyone like a lightning bolt. Ursula, who was about to use her discovery as a weapon, realized that she had stumbled upon something much bigger than she expected. "Impossible," murmured Ted. "Our parents never mentioned—" "Because they didn't know," completed Junior. June was our father's sister, but was separated from the family as a child during the Great Flood of 1962. She was raised by another family here in the small town, while our father was taken to Pittsburgh. The pieces began to fall into place. The sense of familiarity that Ted had felt since the first meeting with June, the way she seemed to know him better than he knew himself, the instinct that led her to welcome Mr. Joe without asking too many questions. "She knew?" asked Ted, his voice almost a whisper. "She found out a few years ago," replied Junior, leafing through the documents. "When Iris's parents appeared asking for help, the girl's father, he found the old records by chance. Researching the family history, June asked him to keep it secret until she found the right moment to tell. At that instant, a child's scream cut through the air. Iris was standing at the door, having overheard the entire conversation. Her small hands clutched the primer to her chest, as if seeking protection. So, she stammered, trying to process the information. "Mr. Theodore and Uncle Junior are my real uncles too?" Before anyone could answer, the machines in June's room began to beep frantically. The medical team rushed to attend to the patient, leaving the group in the hallway, suspended between the shocking discovery and the fear of what could happen next. Dr. Robert came out of the room minutes later, his face grave. "We need to operate now. We can't wait until tomorrow." Ted looked at Junior, who nodded silently. The brothers, separated by years of resentment, now united by the aunt they never knew they had, by the niece that destiny had placed in their path in such an extraordinary way. "We're going to stay here with you," said Ted to Iris, who still seemed in shock. "All of us, your family." The word family echoed through the hospital hallway, carrying a new meaning for everyone present. Ursula, realizing that she had lost her last weapon, quietly withdrew with her lawyers. While June was being prepared for surgery, Iris snuggled between Ted and Junior, holding one hand of each. The primer in her lap was open on the first page, where she had written, in her still uneven handwriting, "My family." What no one knew was that that night of revelations was far from over. In the hospital room, before being taken for surgery, June had asked Mrs. Higgins to bring an old box kept under her bed. Inside it, more secrets awaited to be revealed. Secrets that connected not only Ted and his family, but the entire history of the small town in a perfect circle of coincidences that were not coincidences. The hospital waiting room was plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the monotonous ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional hurried passing of the medical staff through the corridors. It was 3 in the morning, and June's surgery had already lasted more than 5 hours. Iris had finally fallen asleep in Connie's lap, still holding firmly the primer that Ted had given her. Mrs. Higgins arrived carrying the box that June had requested, along with a thermos of strong coffee and homemade cookies for everyone. Her eyes were red from crying, but she maintained the composure that had always been her trademark. "Before being taken for surgery," she said, placing the box on a low table, "June made me promise that I would deliver this to you in case... She's going to be fine," interrupted Ted firmly, refusing to consider any other possibility. Junior, who had remained silent until then, approached the box. It was an old object made of carved wood with delicate carvings that told stories of the past. On the lid, an inscription worn by time, "Albright Family, 1962. "It's the year of the flood," he murmured, his fingers tracing the faded letters. Carefully, as if handling a precious treasure, Junior opened the box. The smell of old paper and stored memories filled the air. Inside, there were photographs, yellowed letters, newspaper clippings, and a small leather-bound notebook. The first photograph showed a family in front of a simple house, a young couple with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. On the back, a note, last photo before the flood, Antonio, Maria, June, John, Ted and Junior's father, and Joseph. 3 siblings, said Ted, his voice choked with emotion. Dad never told us he had a sister. Maybe he didn't know she survived, suggested Connie softly. That flood destroyed many families in the small town. Junior picked up one of the newspaper clippings. The headline, already faded, was still legible. Tragedy in the small town. Flood separates families and leaves dozens missing. The small, leather notebook revealed itself to be a diary, written in a delicate handwriting that changed as the pages progressed, as if accompanying the growth of the writer. It was June's diary. March 12th, 1962, read Junior aloud. Today the water took everything. Mom held me as much as she could, but the current was too strong. When I woke up, I was in another town, with people I didn't know. They say they didn't find the rest of my family. Ted felt a lump in his throat. How many lives had been marked by that tragedy? How many secrets and pains had been kept for decades? The reading continued, revealing how June was adopted by a family of artisans who taught her the work with corn husks, how she grew up looking for news of her brothers, but without success, how years later, already an adult, she discovered that her brother John had survived and been taken to Pittsburgh. But why didn't she ever look for us? Asked Ted, the frustration evident in his voice. The answer came a few pages later in the diary. When I finally found out where John was, he already had his own family, 2 small children, and an established life. Who was I to show up after so long and bring back such painful found under a bridge and shared her bread with him, even though she was hungry? That gesture filled us with pride and also with shame. Pride for the wonderful person you have become, and shame for not having been there to see that growth. Iris looked at Ted, who kept his head down, visibly moved. The girl felt something change inside her little heart. She was beginning to understand that sometimes people kept secrets not out of malice, but out of fear or out of love. We want to meet this Joe, the letter continued. Thank him for taking care of you when we couldn't. June says there's something special about him, something that goes beyond appearances. She has always had a gift for seeing the truth in people. We will be in the small town next month, if you want to see us. The decision is yours, my daughter. We have learned the hard way that true love means respecting the other person's and time and feelings, with all our love, even if you can't believe it yet, Mom and Dad. When Connie finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Junior, accustomed to the harshness of his work as a detective, disguised his emotion by cleaning his glasses. Why didn't you show it to me before? Asked Iris to her grandmother, her voice small but without accusation. Because you were already going through so many changes, my flower, and because... June hesitated, looking at Ted, because I saw in Joe the same search for redemption that I saw in your parents. People who got lost, trying to find their way back. It was then that Mrs. Higgins, who had remained quiet until that moment, decided to reveal one more discovery. There's one more thing. I found this along with the letter. She took out from her apron pocket an old photograph, yellowed by time. In the image, a group of children posed in front of a church. Among them, 2 boys stood out, one holding a piece of bread, offering, after the other, who seemed sad and lonely. It's you, said June, looking at Ted and Junior, back when your parents were also going through difficulties and you lived here in the small town. The brothers took the photo in amazement. The memory of that day was buried so deep that they had completely forgotten. It was you, murmured Junior, looking at his brother. You shared your bread with me when our family was starving. How could I forget that? Ted couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the irony of fate. He had received from Iris the same gesture of kindness that he once offered his brother, a cycle of generosity that spanned generations. "I think I understand now," said Iris softly, surprising everyone with her maturity. "You didn't lie because you wanted to deceive. You lied because you were lost, just like my parents were." At that moment, something changed in the room. It was as if all the hurts and resentments began to dissolve, giving way to a deeper understanding about the nature of forgiveness and love. June, observing the scene with tired but happy eyes, knew that there was one more truth to be revealed, a truth that connected all those lives in an even more surprising way. But her weak heart asked for a moment of pause. Some revelations needed to wait for the right moment to come to light. "I think we've had enough emotions for today," said Dr. Robert, entering the room to check on his patient. "Mrs. June needs to rest." Before everyone left, Iris approached Ted. "Mr. Mr. Theodore, are you still going to teach me to read?" The businessman felt tears in his eyes. "If you still want to learn with me, little one, I will teach you everything I know. And this time," she completed with a small smile, "no lies." "No lies," he promised. "Only truths from now on." What no one knew was that the greatest truth of all was still to come, a truth kept in June's heart for decades, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The days that followed brought a new routine for everyone. Iris continued to live with Junior and Connie, but now spent afternoons at the hospital with her grandmother, always accompanied by Ted, who had rented a house near the historic center of the small town. Reading lessons resumed, this time in a more appropriate environment, the hospital library, where other patients and children often stopped to listen to the stories the two shared. On that specific afternoon, while June rested after another series of exams, Ted watched Iris trying to read an entire page by herself. Her progress was remarkable. In a few weeks, she could already form complete sentences. "Look, I did it!" she exclaimed proudly after finishing the paragraph. "Uncle Ted, why did you decide to teach me to read?" The question caught the businessman by surprise. It was the first time Iris had called him uncle, and there was a genuine curiosity in her eyes that deserved an equally honest answer. "Because when I was a child," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I also had difficulty studying. My parents worked a lot, and we didn't always have money for school supplies. It was a teacher, Mrs. Antonia, who noticed my interest in books and started teaching me after class. She changed my life. And where is she now?" "She passed away many years ago," Ted replied softly. "But before, she made me promise that one day I would pass on what she taught me. I think I was waiting to find the right student." The moment was interrupted by Davis, who entered the library carrying a folder full of documents. Her normally serious face wore an expression difficult to decipher. "Mr. Theodore, can we talk in private?" Connie, who had arrived to pick up Iris, noticed the tension in the air and took the girl to see her grandmother. As soon as they were alone, Davis opened the folder on the table. "We found something in the city's old records," she began. "Something that may explain why June has always seemed so connected to your story." Before she could continue, they were interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Ursula had arrived at the hospital, accompanied by two lawyers and wearing a triumphant expression on her face. "Ted," she called, her voice echoing through the silent hallway. "We need to talk. I discovered something very interesting about your new family." The businessman felt his blood run cold. He knew that tone. It was the same Ursula used when she was about to destroy a competitor in business. "Not here, Ursula," he tried to argue, but she was already taking documents out of her folder. Why not? Everyone needs to know that this whole story is nothing more than a farce. Your dear June is not who she claims to be. What are you talking about? Intervened Davis, her professional posture masking her concern. I'm talking about the fact that this woman, Ursula pointed towards June's room, is not Iris's real grandmother. The girl's original birth records show another name. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. Connie was running down the hallway, pale as a sheet. June is having another crisis, she announced, causing everyone to momentarily forget Ursula's revelation. The medical team acted quickly, but this time the situation seemed more serious. Dr. Robert, after stabilizing the patient, called Ted for a private conversation. We can no longer postpone the surgery, explained the doctor. Her heart is getting weaker and weaker. We need to operate tomorrow. Huh? Do whatever is necessary, Ted replied, signing the authorization documents that the doctor handed him. Money is not a problem. It's not just a matter of money, intervened Ursula, who had followed the two. You have no legal authority to authorize anything. You are not her relative. But I am, said a firm voice coming from the door. Everyone turned to see Junior, still in his detective uniform, holding an old folder of documents. His face showed signs of someone who had cried recently. What are you talking about, Junior? Asked Ted, confused. About the documents that Davis found, he replied, his voice trembling slightly. And about the ones I just discovered in the police department archives. Ted, June is our aunt. The revelation hit everyone like a lightning bolt. Ursula, who was about to use her discovery as a weapon, realized that she had stumbled upon something much bigger than she expected. Impossible, murmured Ted. Our parents never mentioned, because they didn't know, completed Junior. June was our father's sister, but was separated from the family as a child during the Great Flood of 1962. She was raised by another family here in the small town, while our father was taken to Pittsburgh. Then the pieces began to fall into place. The sense of familiarity that Ted had felt since the first meeting with June, the way she seemed to know him better than he knew himself, the instinct that led her to welcome Mr. Joe without asking too many questions. She knew? Asked Ted, his voice almost a whisper. She found out a few years ago, replied Junior, leafing through the documents. When Iris's parents appeared asking for help, the girl's father, he found the old records by chance, researching the family history. June asked him to keep it secret until she found the right moment to tell. At that instant, a child's scream cut through the air. Iris was standing at the door, having overheard the entire conversation. Her small hands clutched the primer to her chest as if seeking protection. So, she stammered, trying to process the information. Mr. Theodore and Uncle Junior are my real uncles too. Before anyone could answer, the machines in June's room began to beep frantically. The medical team rushed to attend to the patient, leaving the group in the hallway, suspended between the shocking discovery and the fear of what could happen. Next, Dr. Robert came out of the room minutes later, his face grave. We need to operate now. We can't wait until tomorrow. Ted looked at Junior, who nodded silently. The brothers, separated by years of resentment, now united by the aunt they never knew they had, by the niece that destiny had placed in their path in such an extraordinary way. We're going to stay here with you, said Ted to Iris, who still seemed in shock. All of us. Your family. The word family echoed through the hospital hallway, carrying a new meaning for everyone present. Ursula, realizing that she had lost her last weapon, quietly withdrew with her lawyers. While June was being prepared for surgery, Iris snuggled between Ted and Junior, holding one hand of each. The primer in her lap was open on the first page, where she had written in her still, uneven handwriting, "My family." What no one knew was that that night of revelations was far from over. In the hospital room, before being taken for surgery, June had asked Mrs. Higgins to bring an old box kept under her bed. Inside it, more secrets awaited to be revealed. Secrets that connected not only Ted and his family, but the entire history of the small town in a perfect circle of coincidences that were not coincidences. The hospital waiting room was plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the monotonous ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional hurried passing of the medical staff through the corridors. It was 3 in the morning, and June's surgery had already lasted more than 5 hours. Iris had finally fallen asleep in Connie's lap, still holding firmly the primer that Ted had given her. Mrs. Higgins arrived carrying the box that June had requested, along with a thermos of strong coffee and homemade cookies for everyone. Her eyes were red from crying, but she maintained the composure that had always been her trademark. "Before being taken for surgery," she said, placing the box on a low table, "June made me promise that I would deliver this to you in case... She's going to be fine," interrupted Ted firmly, refusing to consider any other possibility. Junior, who had remained silent until then, approached the box. It was an old object made of carved wood, with delicate carvings that told stories of the past. On the lid, an inscription worn by time, "Albright Family, 1962. "It's the year of the flood," he murmured, his fingers tracing the faded letters. Carefully, as if handling a precious treasure, Junior opened the box. The sateur smell of old paper and stored memories filled the air. Inside, there were photographs, yellowed letters, newspaper clippings, and a small leather-bound notebook. The first photograph showed a family in front of a simple house, a young couple with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. On the back, a note: "Last photo before the flood, Antonio, Maria, June, John, Ted and Junior's father, and Joseph." 3 siblings, said Ted, his voice choked with emotion. "Dad never told us he had a sister." "Maybe he didn't know she survived," suggested Connie softly. "That flood destroyed many families in the small town." Junior picked up one of the newspaper clippings. The headline, already faded, was still legible. "Tragedy in the small town. Flood separates families and leaves dozens missing." The small leather notebook revealed itself to be a diary, written in a delicate handwriting that changed as the pages progressed, as if accompanying the growth of the writer. It was June's diary. "March 12th, 1962, read Junior aloud. "Today the water took everything. Mom held me as much as she could, but the current was too strong. When I woke up, I was in another town with people I didn't know. They say they didn't find the rest of my family." Ted felt a lump in his throat. How many lives had been marked by that tragedy? How many secrets and pains had been kept for decades? The reading continued, revealing how June was adopted by a family of artisans who taught her the work with corn husks. How she grew up looking for news of her brothers, but without success. How years later, already an adult, she discovered that her brother John had survived and been taken to Pittsburgh. "But why didn't she ever look for us?" asked Ted, the frustration evident in his voice. The answer came a few pages later in the diary. "When I finally found out where John was, he already had his own family, 2 small children, and an established life. Who was I to show up after so long and bring back such painful dolorosas? Decidi observar de longe, garantir que estavam bem. É o suficiente para mim." "She watched us," murmured Junior. "That's why she knew so much about us." A loose photo fell from the diary. It showed Ted and Junior, still children, playing in a park. On the back, the date and a note. "My nephews. How I wish I could hug them." Iris, who had woken up with the movement, approached silently. Her big eyes studied the photos with intensity. "Grandma always said that family is like a patchwork quilt," she said, surprising everyone. "Each piece has its story, and even when you lose a piece, you can find another that matches." The wisdom of that 6-year-old child struck everyone like a lightning bolt of understanding. June had spent her life sewing her own patchwork quilt, joining pieces of family where she could find them. Deeper in the box, they found documents that explained how June had become responsible for Iris. The story was more complex than they imagined. The girl's parents, before leaving, had discovered the family connection through a genealogical research. "She is not just my adoptive grandmother," they read in the notes left by Iris's father. "She's my great-aunt by blood. Destiny has mysterious ways of reconnecting the bonds that have been broken." A sealed envelope addressed to Ted and Junior was at the bottom of the box. With trembling hands, Ted opened it. "My dear nephews, if you are reading this, it means that you have finally discovered the truth. I do not regret having kept it a secret for so long. Each family has its right time to heal its wounds. When I saw Ted for the first time, disguised as Mr. Joe, I immediately recognized my brother John's eyes. The same determined look, the same kindness hidden under a hard shell. I knew I needed to help him find his way back, just as Iris needed to find hers. We are all parts of the same story, patches of the same quilt. Time and circumstances may separate us, but love, that invisible thread that connects us, always finds a way to reunite us. Take care of Iris. She has the gift of our family, to see beyond appearances, to find goodness even in the most unlikely places. And remember, sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves. With all my love, June." The silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Robert. His tired face carried a discreet smile. "The surgery was a success," he announced. "June is a fighter. She will need a lot of rest and care, but she should recover completely." The relief was immediate and palpable. Iris jumped for joy, hugging first Ted, then Junior. Connie wiped away discreet tears, while Mrs. Higgins murmured prayers of thanks. But there was still one last surprise kept in the box. A document that would change once again the course of that extraordinary story. A document that would prove that nothing in that story had really been coincidence. Dr. Robert, who was watching the scene with interest, recognized the paper as soon as Junior took it out of the box. His face paled slightly. "This is," he began, but was interrupted by an urgent call from the infirmary. The document remained in Junior's hand, awaiting the right moment to reveal its secret, a secret that connected not only that family, but the entire history of the small town in a perfect circle of intertwined destinies. The morning sun entered through the hospital windows, bathing June's room with a golden and soft light. After the successful surgery, she'd been transferred to the ICU, where she would remain for 48 hours under observation. In the waiting room, the family took turns, no one wanting to leave the hospital until she was completely out of danger. Ted, who had spent the whole night awake, held the document found in the box with trembling hands. It was an old certificate, partially damaged by water, probably from the same flood that had separated the family. What was most intriguing was Dr. Robert's reaction upon seeing it. "We need to talk," said the doctor, returning to the waiting room after checking his patients. His normally serene face showed signs of concern. Junior, who was dozing in an armchair, woke up with the doctor's arrival. Connie had taken Iris home to rest, promising to return later. Mrs. Higgins was preparing more coffee in the small kitchenette that the hospital had made available to the family. "That document," began Dr. Robert, sitting down heavily, "I recognized because it is part of my family's history too." Ted and Junior exchanged intrigued glances. The doctor continued, "In 1962, during the flood, my father was the only doctor. At the regional hospital in the small town, he was the one who treated the victims of the tragedy, including a family called Albright. "Our family," murmured Junior. "Yes, he kept a detailed diary of all the cases he attended. When I saw that certificate, I recognized it immediately. It's the same one he mentioned in his notes." Carefully, Dr. Robert removed from his folder an old notebook, bound in dark leather. The yellowed pages contained a precise handwriting, typical of doctors from a time when each medical record was written by hand. "March 12th, 1962, he read. "Today, I treated a family victim of the flood. The Albrights, father, mother, and 3 children. The girl, June, had severe hypothermia. The 2 boys, John and Joseph, had several injuries, but nothing serious. The parents—" Dr. Robert paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "The parents were in critical condition. Antonio, the father, did not survive the injuries. Maria, the mother, remained in a coma for weeks. During this period, the children were separated, a common practice at the time, unfortunately. The system was precarious, and many families ended up divided permanently." "But why is this so important now?" asked Ted, feeling that there was more to the story. "Because," continued the doctor, "my father not only treated your family, he was responsible for a decision that changed the destiny of all of you." At that moment, Mrs. Higgins returned with the coffee, accompanied by a surprise. Davis, the social worker, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Sorry for the hour," she said, "but after I heard about June's surgery, I spent the night searching in the social welfare archives. I found something you need to see." They were old records, adoption, documents and relocation of children after the flood. Among them, there were notes about the Albright siblings. "According to these records," explained Davis, "there was a specific reason for separating the children. Something that is not in the official documents, but that I found in personal notes from the social workers of the time." Dr. Robert nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "My father mentions this in his diary. Maria Albright, when she woke up from the coma, made a specific request." He turned a few pages of the diary until he found the entry he was looking for. April 15th, 1962. "Maria Albright regained consciousness today. Her first request was to see her children, but when she learned that they had been separated, she made a peculiar request. She asked us to keep June in the small town, where she could learn the traditional crafts of the region. It's the legacy of our family," she said. "June has the gift in her hands, like all the women before her." "The corn husk crafts," murmured Ted, remembering the delicate pieces that June created. "Exactly," confirmed Dr. Robert. "Maria knew that she was too sick to take care of all 3 children alone. She asked that the boys be sent to Pittsburgh, where they would have more opportunities for study and work. But June should stay in the small town to preserve the family tradition." "Our mother," said Junior, his voice choked with emotion. "She never told us anything about this, because she left soon after," explained Davis, consulting her documents. "The records show that Maria Albright left the hospital a few weeks later, but never fully recovered. She entrusted the children to the system, hoping that each one would find their way." "And we found it," said a weak voice from the door. Everyone turned, surprised. Iris was there, still in her pajamas, holding Connie's hand. Her eyes shone with a wisdom beyond her age. "Grandma June always says that everyone has their own way," she continued. "The boys went to be important men in the big city, and she stayed here to make art with her hands and take care of me." The simplicity of the girl's observation brought tears to everyone's eyes. It was true. Each one had followed the path that Destiny had traced, only to meet again decades later, united by the gesture of kindness of a child. Dr. Robert still had one more revelation. There is something more you need to know. The reason why I immediately recognized Ted when he brought June for surgery. He made a dramatic pause. I am the son of the doctor who treated your family in that flood, and it was my father who, years later, helped June to locate her brothers. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway. A nurse appeared at the door, panting. "Dr. Robert, Mrs. June is waking up!" The news energized everyone, but before they could move, the nurse added something that made their hearts stop, and she is asking to see a person called Maria. June's request to see Maria left everyone in shock. Dr. Robert was the first to react, running to the ICU room to assess his patient. The others remained in the waiting room, trying to process the meaning of that unexpected request. She must be confused because of the anesthesia, suggested Connie gently, noting the paleness on Ted and Junior's faces. Iris, who still held her primer to her chest, tugged at Ted's sleeve. "Uncle, who is Maria?" Before anyone could answer, Mrs. Higgins, who had remained extraordinarily quiet, cleared her throat to draw attention. "I think there's one more thing. You need to see," she said, taking a yellowed envelope from her apron pocket. "I found this last night when I was organizing June's things. It was hidden inside one of the oldest straw baskets. The envelope, addressed simply to my children, had a date written in the corner, April 15th, 1962, the same day that, according to the doctor's diary, Maria Albright had woken up from the coma. With trembling hands, Junior opened the envelope. Inside there was a letter written in a delicate but firm handwriting and several old photographs. My beloved children, if you are reading this letter, it means that the moment I have been waiting for has finally arrived. The moment when our family would be reunited. When I woke up in that hospital after the flood, I knew that I would not have the strength to raise you three alone. The loss of your father, my weakened health, everything conspired against us, but I couldn't just let fate decide for me. I needed to make sure that each of you had the chance to follow the path that was destined for you. John and Joseph, my boys, I sent you to Pittsburgh because I saw in your eyes the same ambition and determination as your father. You needed opportunities that the small town could not offer at that time. But June, my June, had a special gift. Her small hands already knew how to transform straw into art, like all the women in our family before her. I couldn't allow that legacy to be lost. So I made a choice, the most difficult choice a mother can make. I decided to give each of you the chance to grow and develop in your own way, even if it meant we were separated. Before leaving, I made 3 promises. First, that I would find a way to keep you connected, even if you didn't know it. Second, that I would ensure that the legacy of our family survived through June. Third, that one day when the moment was right, you would meet again. To fulfill these promises, I relied on the help of extraordinary people. Dr. Antonio Robert, who not only saved our lives, but also promised to keep an eye on June, the family of artisans who welcomed her and nurtured her gift. And mainly, I relied on time, that master who has his own way of healing wounds and reconnecting broken bonds. In the years that followed, I watched your growth from afar. I saw John become a respected businessman, father of 2 wonderful boys, Ted and Junior. I saw Joseph build a new life in a distant city, and I saw my June flourish in the small town, keeping our tradition alive through her blessed hands. Now, as I write this letter, I know that my time is short, but I also know that I have planted the seeds necessary for one day our family to be reunited again. June, my guardian of secrets, received this letter with the instruction to only reveal it when all the pieces of our family puzzle are ready to fit together. And if you are reading this now, it means that that moment has finally arrived. With all my eternal love, Maria Albuquerque. The reading of the letter was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Robert, who seemed simultaneously worried and amazed. "June is conscious," he announced, "and perfectly lucid. She is not delirious. She is asking to see Maria because—" He paused, looking at the photographs scattered on the table, "because Maria is alive." The impact of that revelation was like a wave hitting everyone. Ted fell into a chair, while Junior needed to lean against the wall. "Impossible," murmured Ted. "Our mother told us that she had passed away years ago." "Not passed away as you thought," explained Mrs. Higgins, her voice trembling slightly. "Maria never left the small town. She just moved away." It was then that Iris, who had remained extraordinarily quiet, let out an exclamation of surprise. Her big eyes fixed on one of the photographs that had fallen on the floor, a recent image of an elegant lady feeding pigeons in the central square of the small town. "I know her," exclaimed the girl. "It's the owner of the old bakery, the one who always gives me bread when I pass by." Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly. "Maria never abandoned you. She just found a way to stay close without interfering in your lives. The bakery was her observation post, her way of keeping herself connected to the family without revealing her identity." "The bakery," murmured Connie, remembering something. "The bakery that's right on the way between June's house and downtown. The same way Iris went every day. No, the same place where it all began," completed Ted, his voice choked with emotion. "Where Iris got the bread she shared with me under the bridge." At that moment, as if destiny wanted to confirm all the revelations, they heard footsteps in the hallway. A lady with white hair and elegant posture, wearing a baker's apron, stopped at the door of the waiting room. "Hello, my children," said Maria Albright, her soft voice carrying decades of contained love. "I think it's time for you to meet your grandmother." The silence that followed Maria's arrival was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Ted and Junior remained paralyzed, their eyes fixed on the woman who, during all those years, had been so close without them knowing. Iris was the first to break the moment of stupefaction, running to hug the lady who had always given her fresh bread and sweet words. "Grandma Maria," she exclaimed, wrapping her little arms around the lady's waist. "That's why you always said I reminded you of someone in your family." Maria stroked the girl's hair tenderly, her watery eyes meeting those of her grandsons. "You have the same eyes as your great-grandmother," she said softly. "The same eyes that I see in Ted and Junior." Mrs. Higgins discreetly began to gather her things. "I think this is a conversation for the family," she murmured. But Maria stopped her with a gesture. "You are family too, Higgins. It was you who helped keep all the secrets during all these years. Who took care of June when I couldn't be around openly." Dr. Robert, who was watching the scene with professional emotion, cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Maria, June is asking for you. I think it's time." The mention of June's name seemed to awaken Ted and Junior from their trance. "Why?" asked Ted, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "Why keep this secret for so long?" Maria sat down heavily in one of the chairs in the waiting room, the weight of decades of secrets evident on her shoulders. "Come," she said, extending her hands to her grandsons. "I'll tell you everything as we walk to June's room." The small group followed through the hospital hallways, Maria in the center, flanked by Ted and Junior. Iris followed hand in hand with Connie, absorbing every word of the story that began to unfold. "After the flood," began Maria, "when I woke up in the hospital and learned that Antonio had passed away, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. You were too young to understand, but our situation was desperate. I had no way to raise 3 children alone, especially being so sick." They stopped briefly while a stretcher passed through the hallway. Maria took the moment to wipe away a stubborn tear. So I did what I thought was best at the time, to ensure that each of you had the chance to grow and develop in your own way. John, your father, was sent to Pittsburgh with Joseph. June stayed in the small town to preserve our craft tradition. But you didn't leave, interrupted Junior. You stayed here the whole time, watching from afar. Yes, confirmed Maria. I bought the bakery with the money from your grandfather's insurance. It was the perfect place, central enough to keep an eye on June, and a business that allowed me to help discreetly when needed. An extra bread here, an information there. They arrived at the door of the ICU. Through the glass, they could see June, still pale but visibly stronger, sitting on the hospital bed. When your parents settled in Pittsburgh, continued Maria, I kept in touch through letters with your mother. She understood my decision, although she did not completely agree. She was the one who kept me informed about your growth, sending photographs and news. That's why you never seemed surprised when I told you about my Uncle Ted, exclaimed Iris, making everyone smile at her perspicacity. Exactly, my little one. When you appeared in June's life, it was like seeing destiny weaving its threads once again. And when Ted arrived, disguised as Mr. Joe, Maria smiled, looking affectionately at her grandson. Well, let's just say that some features are impossible to hide, no matter how good the disguise is. Dr. Robert approached the group. June is ready to receive visitors, but we need to go in small groups so as not to tire her. Go first, Mom, said Junior softly, the word Mom sounding strange and at the same time natural on his lips. You two have a lot to talk about. Maria squeezed her grandson's hands before entering the room. Through the glass, everyone watched. The moment when the two sisters reunited after so many decades of shared secrets. It's like a puzzle, said Iris, her voice thoughtful. All the pieces were always there, they just needed to find the right place. Connie hugged the girl, amazed at her wisdom. And you, little one, were the piece that started to put everything together. Ted, observing the scene through the glass, felt something transform within himself. All his search for meaning, which had begun with a mistaken diagnosis and led him to live as a bum, finally made sense. It wasn't just about finding the value of life, it was about finding the way back home. But there was still one last revelation to be made, a last secret kept in Maria's heart that would forever change everyone's understanding of the true meaning of family. Through the glass, they saw her take a small paper package from her apron pocket, handing it to June with trembling hands. What was in that package, and how its contents would connect all the remaining pieces of this extraordinary family story, was about to be revealed. And once again, it would be through Iris's eyes that everyone would understand the true meaning of love, forgiveness, and redemption. The small package that Maria handed to June seemed to contain the weight of the world in its folds of brown paper. Through the glass of the ICU, the family watched as the two sisters, now reunited after so many decades, shared a moment of deep intimacy. June, still weak from the surgery but with her eyes shining with emotion, carefully unfolded the package. Inside, there was an object that made her eyes fill with tears instantly. A small corn-husk doll, yellowed by time but still perfectly preserved. "Can I go in?" asked Iris softly, pulling at Ted's sleeve. There was something in the scene that attracted her, as if her little heart knew that this moment was crucial for the whole family. Dr. Robert nodded, allowing the girl to enter the room, accompanied by Ted. Junior, Connie, and Mrs. Higgins remained watching through the window, respecting the intimacy of the moment. "This doll," began Maria, her voice choked with emotion, "was the first piece of craftsmanship that our mother taught June to make. She was only 5 years old, the same age as you were, Iris, when you started to learn." June held the doll as if it were made of the most precious crystal. "I thought it had been lost in the flood," she murmured. And it was, confirmed Maria. But not before I made one just like it, exactly the same, to keep as a promise that one day our family would be reunited again. Ted watched the scene with a lump in his throat. The straw doll, so simple in its manufacture, carried within it the entire history of his family, the traditions, the separations, the hopes of reunion. "But there's more," said Maria, taking a folded paper from her apron pocket. "This explains why I kept secret for so long, why I needed to wait for the right moment for us to reunite." The paper, when unfolded, revealed an old land deed. The date on the document made Ted hold his breath. March 10th, 1962, 2 days before the Great Flood. "Your grandfather," explained Maria to Iris, who was watching everything with attentive eyes, "had bought this land to build a crafts school. It was his dream to create a place where the traditions of the small town could be preserved and passed on." "The land on the Beacon Hill," murmured June, recognizing the location described in the document. "Exactly," confirmed Maria, "but he passed away before realizing his dream. And I needed to make sure that this dream didn't die with him. That's why I separated you in the way I separated you, so that each one would develop the talents necessary to, one day, realize your grandfather's dream." The revelation hit everyone like a lightning bolt of understanding. Ted, the successful businessman with resources to make the project a reality. Junior, the detective with connections and knowledge of the town. June, the artisan who kept the tradition alive. And now Iris, the new generation that united all the threads of this complex plot. "But why now?" asked Ted, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Because now all the necessary elements have finally aligned," replied Maria. "You, Ted, have found the true meaning of life through simplicity. Junior has reconciled with his role in the town. June has proven that our art can survive any adversity. And Iris," she smiled at her great-granddaughter, "Iris has shown us that the heart of our family continues to beat strongly in the new generation." It was then that Iris, with the wisdom that only children possess, took the straw doll and began to carefully undo its braids. "What are you doing, little one?" asked June, alarmed. "Redoing," replied the girl simply. "As you taught me, Grandma. When a braid gets old, we undo it and make it again, stronger." The symbolism of the gesture did not go unnoticed by anyone. It was exactly what was happening with that family, undoing the knots of the past to create stronger bonds in the present. "There's one more thing," said Maria, taking a last object from her apron, an old key attached to a leather cord. "This is the key to the old craft house on the hill, where your great-grandmother taught lessons. The place has been abandoned for years, but the walls still hold the stories of hundreds of artisans who passed through there." Ted took the key with reverence. In his mind, he was already beginning to form a plan, not only to realize his grandfather's dream, but to create something even bigger, something that honored all generations of his family. At that moment, as if destiny itself wanted to give its seal of approval, a ray of sunshine crossed the hospital window, illuminating the straw doll in Iris's hands. The girl had managed to undo and redo one of the braids, firmer and more beautiful than before. "Now there's only one thing missing," she said, raising her eyes to her assembled family. "We need to pick up my parents in a town some hours from here. They are also part of this braid." The wisdom of that 6-year-old child once again moved. "Everyone," Maria smiled, taking one last paper from her pocket, a recent telegram. "They arrive tomorrow," she announced, making Iris's eyes shine with joy. "Because tomorrow," she made a dramatic pause, looking at each face present in the room, each member of that extraordinary family that destiny had separated only to reunite in an even stronger way. "Tomorrow is the day when your great-grandmother started teaching crafts exactly 63 years ago, and tomorrow will be the day when our family will finally be complete again. But there was still one last surprise kept up the sleeve of destiny, a final revelation that no one could have foreseen. And that revelation was hidden in the most unlikely place possible. In Iris's own hands, who continued to work on the straw doll, discovering a secret that had waited decades to be revealed. The next morning dawned with a special brightness in the small town. The golden sun bathed the stone streets of the historic town, as if nature itself wanted to participate in that unique moment. In the hospital, June had received permission to leave the ICU and transfer to a normal room where she could receive more visitors. Iris, who had slept with the straw doll embraced, continued intrigued by something she had discovered the night before while undoing the braids. Inside the doll's body, hidden among the straws yellowed by time, she had found a small rolled-up paper, so old and delicate that she was afraid to open it alone. "Grandma Maria," she called as soon as she arrived at the hospital with Connie. "I found this inside the doll." Maria took the paper with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her mother's handwriting. "It's a letter from your great-grandmother," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "written on the eve of the flood." Everyone gathered in June's room to hear the reading. Ted and Junior sat each on one side of the aunt's bed, while Mrs. Higgins and Dr. Robert remained close to the door. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of two more people, a couple that made Iris's eyes fill with tears. "Mom! Dad!" she cried, running into the arms of the parents she hadn't seen in so long. Clara and Robert, Iris's parents, entered the room with expressions that mixed joy and apprehension. They were thinner and older than in the photographs, but their eyes shone with an immense love for their daughter. "Sorry it took us so long to come back," said Clara, hugging her daughter tightly. "We needed to make sure we were ready." "I know," replied Iris, with surprising wisdom. "Sometimes you need to get lost to find yourself, right, Grandma?" June smiled, nodding with tears in her eyes. Maria, holding the old paper found in the doll, cleared her throat gently to draw everyone's attention. "I think it's time to know our mother's last words," she said, beginning to read. "My beloved children, if you are reading this letter, it means that time has finally brought back what the water took away. I write these words on the eve of the great rain, with a heart heavy with omens. I know that something is about to happen, something that will change the destiny of our family forever. But I also know that what we built here, our art, our tradition, our love for the land and the people of the small town, is stronger than any flood. That's why I hide this message in the doll that June made today, her first perfect piece, knowing that one day it will find its way back to our family. The land on Beacon Hill is not just a piece of land. It is the heart of our dream, a dream of creating a place where our art can grow and multiply, where the hands that work the husks can also shape the future of our town. But more important than the land is the treasure it holds. Under the old fig tree, next to the oldest roots, I buried our greatest wealth, not gold or jewels, but seeds. Seeds of the special heirloom corn that our family has cultivated for generations, the only type that produces the perfect husks for our crafts. These seeds are our true heritage. They carry within them not only the promise of husks for crafts, but the very essence of our history, resilience, the ability to be reborn, the beauty that arises from simplicity. Maria, my eldest daughter, you have always been the guardian of our secrets. June, your hands have the gift that passes from mother to daughter in our family. John, your strength and determination are like the roots of the fig tree, deep and unwavering. I know that destiny may separate us, but I also know that the same destiny will find a way to reunite us again. When that happens, look for the seeds. They are the key to realizing the dream that I could not complete in life. With all my love, Josefa Albright. When Maria finished reading, the silence in the room was almost palpable. It was Iris who first understood the complete meaning of that revelation. "The seeds!" she exclaimed. "That's why the husks that Grandma June uses are different from all the others. Softer, more flexible. And that's why no other artisan can make pieces like hers," completed Ted, remembering the craft exhibitions he had seen in his travels. "It's a special kind of corn." "That had been lost for decades," added Maria. "Until now." At that moment, as if all the pieces of a puzzle finally fit together, each person present in the room understood their role in that extraordinary story. It had not been a coincidence that Ted appeared as a bum precisely in the small town. It had not been by chance that Iris found him under that specific bridge. Each event, each decision had been a thread weaving a larger plot. "I think I know what we need to do," said Ted, standing up with a renewed energy. "Let's realize our grandmother's dream, but in an even bigger way. Not just a crafts school, but a complete cultural center. A place where tradition can meet the future. With a plantation of the special corn," added Junior, "to ensure that the raw material never runs out. And a bakery," completed Maria with a smile, "so we never lack bread to share with those who need it." Clara and Robert, who had remained silent, exchanged a meaningful look. "We can help," offered Robert. "I'm a music teacher. Clara is a craftswoman. We can contribute to the project." June, who was watching everything with bright eyes, extended her hand to Iris. The girl approached the bed, still holding the straw doll partially undone. "Shall we redo it together?" asked June softly. "Now that our family is complete, she deserves a new braid." While grandmother and granddaughter worked on the doll, the adults began to plan the next steps. Ted already envisioned the cultural center project. Junior made calls to speed up the necessary authorizations. Maria and Clara exchanged recipes and craft techniques. Dr. Robert, watching the scene with an emotional smile, thought of his father and how happy he would be to see that the family he helped save so many years ago had finally found their way back home. A month later on Beacon Hill, a new story began to be written. The seeds were found exactly where the letter indicated, and the first cornstalks were already sprouting. The cultural center, named the Husk House, opened its doors with classes in crafts, music, and literature. And in the center of the main courtyard, in a specially designed glass dome, was she, the straw doll that had kept for so long the secrets of a family. Now, with her braids redone by 4 generations of skilled hands, she seemed to smile at everyone who passed by, as if she knew that her mission was finally accomplished. Ted never went back to being the cold businessman he once was. He divided his time between Pittsburgh and the small town, dedicating himself to social projects and spending every free moment with his newfound family. Ursula, surprisingly, ended up becoming an ally of the project, impressed with the story of overcoming and union. June recovered completely and returned to teaching crafts, now to regular classes of children and adults. Maria continued with her bakery, but now without having to hide who she really was. And Iris grew up surrounded by the love of all her family, learning that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places. And so, in the historic streets of the small town, a new tradition began. That of telling the story of the family that the flood separated and that love reunited, proving that some ties are too strong to be broken, even by time or distance. A story that began with a simple gesture of kindness. A girl sharing her bread with a stranger under a bridge, and ended up rewriting the destiny of entire generations.